that time of the month again. We are back with a brand new episode of the Health Tech Hub. I am your host, as always. I'm Paul Buckland. I am the growth strategist here at MyCare. And this month we have another really exciting guest. He actually reached out to me with a really interesting topic. We got together and we thought this would be a really good episode for you guys to listen to. We've got Sugz Maha on. He's a dentist, a clinician. Main topic of this episode, we're basically going to be talking around the communication barriers between providers and clinicians and to kind of how to improve collaboration, maybe areas where people fall short in developing something and not fully understanding the practical applications that it'll have when it goes to the place, and a bunch of other stuff. We went off topic a few times. So, hi, Sugz. Thanks for being on the podcast this month. It's a pleasure to have you here.
No, I'm really excited to be part of this. I've listened to a few episodes, so.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I know you messaged me actually from one of our previous episodes, so I'm glad it enticed you to want to jump on and talk to us. For everybody listening, do you want to just give just a little bit of background about who you are, your experience, what you've done in the past, what you currently do, just to let everybody know a little bit more about you?
Yeah. So I'm Sugz. Predominantly I'm a general dentist, and I work in Hertfordshire. I'm based in London, and I've been working in mixed practice, so NHS and private and all that kind of stuff. But on the side, I've been developing a marketing agency. This marketing agency is mainly focused on healthcare businesses, B2B, B2C, and it made sense for me. It just kind of naturally progressed that way. I started out just doing copywriting, and then it kind of progressed into more of like a full funnel marketing agency for healthcare, mainly because the problem I find is that a lot of health tech businesses, and we've talked about this, off air, but a lot of health tech businesses that are marketing towards clinicians, for instance, it's very difficult for them to kind of translate what they do to clinicians accurately. And I think that's where I come into play, because I understand both sides, right? Not only from the clinician's point of view, but from the patient's point of view. So that's a lot of what I do, is just kind of sharpening communication, trying to make things more persuasive from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's something, we see all the time. At the moment, there's the NHS in particular is in a dire need for new technologies, right? We have the winter pressures, the staff burnout rates, all of the stuff we've listed in previous podcast episodes and all of that. And there is a real need for kind of innovative solutions to help ease the burden. But so people may come along and say, yeah, I can do that. Maybe a tech guy, I can do that. But they don't have any idea how on the ground, as I like to say, that will actually be put into practice. And I think that's exactly why, like you said, you've created this marketing agency, and because there's a need for healthcare, for these companies to accurately portray what they're saying. So with all of this in mind, what have you seen so far, kind of, in your history? What were the most common communication barriers between, the providers, the tech providers and things, and clinicians? What are the most common ones, and how do you think they can maybe start to overcome it to improve the collaboration between the two when they're looking to maybe, procure some technology?
Yeah, I think, starting off, I think the biggest barrier a lot of the time, particularly when we're talking health tech, is how we can integrate it into existing workflows for clinicians. Because I think, as a clinician myself, within dental, I'd say we're lagging behind the medical side of things in terms of technology and adopting new technology. We tend to lag behind, and I think the reason for that is because a lot of the time, particularly in the UK, this is prominent, but in a public health system like the NHS, there's a lot of time constraints, and when you're trying to add on and you're trying to bolt on various tech solutions, it ends up with this really convoluted workflow where it's like, you've got about 5 different pieces of software that you're trying to integrate with one another, and then one doesn't play ball, and then all of a sudden you're kind of screwed, because then it throws everything else off pace. So it's kind of a case of how you can integrate things into existing workflows for clinicians, and I think that's the biggest barrier ultimately. That's why so many clinicians are so resistant to it. Even when I talk to, and people think, when I consult with a lot of health tech brands, they think it's an age thing, and they think it's just it's older clinicians that struggle to adopt tech, but it's actually across the board, I find. And even with myself as a clinician, I find that adopting new tech can be difficult because you're so cemented within a certain workflow that you've used since you qualified. Trying to add something new on it's quite a challenge.
I think it's interesting that you said that, actually, because I would automatically presume that it is the kind of older demographic of clinicians that would maybe have some resistance to it. But it's interesting that you say it's across the board, and your explanation actually makes complete sense because it's kind of everybody, whatever job they're doing, right? They, like you said, they have their workflow. You know, I have mine. You know, wake up, you have your to-do list. You know, you have this, you do this, and then if somebody says, "Oh, we're going to actually implement this new technology, which is going to technically it should help you, right?" But and I think as well from a clinician point of view, the stakes are a lot higher. So for yourself or anybody in hospitals and things, if you know you're there to do a service for the patient, and it isn't something anybody can do. So having a piece of technology that's completely realistically it's completely alien to you, right? Because you know you haven't built it, you've just procured it and brought it in. You'll have an understanding, but I think the hesitancy could be because is it going to work as well as it says it should? For one, is it going to keep the level of kind of patient experience at least the same or increase? Because you don't want a patient to come in and use this new technology, they don't have a good experience. You know, technically you guys are at fault, even though it's not, even though it's this new technology, but because you guys have brought it in. So I can understand the hesitancy, and I think it is as well, just because it is just a higher risk.
Yeah.
You know, I'm keen to hear kind of your thoughts on that, but I think there's just more at stake really in kind of healthcare, especially with clinicians, because their jobs are, you know, a kind of a high stake career, really, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a big element of it, actually. I mean, you're talking from a perspective of kind of liability, I guess, and I think that's a big thing. You know, we're not just talking liability in terms of the patient and actually managing the patient's health, but also just medico-legally. There's things that can go wrong. So, for instance, I'll use an example. So, um, in dentistry, which is very common, and I'm seeing it a lot in medicine now creeping in, but it's a bit harder because obviously with medicine you're dealing with like a massive organization with the NHS, versus dentistry, which is a bit more independent. But I tend to find that AI is like a big, you know, it's the big buzzword, right, of 20,
Yeah,
well,
of course.
last year and 2024, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. The last few years, everything's got AI in it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah,
Even if maybe behind the scenes it doesn't. They just you kind of chuck it in, don't you, to catch people's
yeah.
attention. But that can also have a kind of a negative effect now, though, can't it? Because everybody's using AI or using it at least in their terminology and their copy and their kind of how they're presenting. It kind of becomes diluted. Whereas
Yeah.
certain solutions, so obviously, my care, for example, you know, we have a conversational AI, which obviously again it's the buzzword, but you know, our solution is genuinely a cutting edge, you know, kind of an
Mm.
innovative conversational AI. But let's say, you know, I don't know, let's say half of the people that are using it maybe aren't truly actually leveraging AI or aren't using it to kind of the full potential. It almost would have a negative effect on those that are in the eyes of a clinician, right? Because let's say yourself, you know, the practice where you are, you kind of procure some technology which uses AI or at least uses a small element of AI. You have a bad experience with it because, and obviously people are always like, oh, AI is going to take over the world and you know all of that kind of angle. But you have a bad experience, and then let's say we came to you and said, you know, we have this, you know, conversational AI. You know, it does this, this, and this. Here's the case studies to back up kind of its use, its health outcomes, so on and so forth. But because you've already had that bad experience with something associated with AI,
Mm.
it will have a negative effect on the good solutions actually working in the NHS, helping to tackle some of these issues. So I think it kind of can be quite difficult, this like flooding of the AI terminology that's happened on people that are actually doing a good job through people potentially, as we've said, that maybe make a solution which involves AI, but aren't clued in from a clinician point of view. They haven't had consultants on board. Maybe nobody in the company has any sort of clinical background, and it would ultimately harm all of the people that have.
Yeah, well, I think that's the issue, because obviously I've seen a little bit of what Mike has got to offer, right? I've had a chat with Ben, for example, and he demoed some of the stuff, and that's genuine. Like in my eyes, that feels like actually what AI is capable of. Whereas what I'm seeing a lot of, which I'm getting tired of, to be honest, is basically GPT wrappers, and just kind of it's Chat GPT that's been somehow given like a new UI to make it seem like something revolutionary, but actually it's not really
Yeah,
doing. a whole lot. And the issue with that is, and the big issue actually really with those ones is things like GDPR and protection of patients' data. How is that all going to pan out, right? We're so early, we're at the precipice right now, but we don't know how this is all going to pan out 5-10 years from now. I was reading an article yesterday about the fact that more and more GPs are using ChatGPT to co-diagnose, and that's an interesting one, right? Because that's a valid use, you could argue, of AI as an assistant for diagnosis. But then what about when it becomes, the pendulum shifts, and then we start becoming dependent on AI to diagnose, and who's cross-checking AI to make sure that it's accurate?
Yeah, exactly. I had one of my I think it may have been the first one actually. My first ever one with a gentleman called Mark from C2AI, and he kind of said the same thing, and I kind of said, and it's what I keep saying. So AI and these new technologies are coming in. Then in my eyes, they shouldn't replace anything. From a clinical point of view, they should just be kind of a guide, like a helping hand to help them enhance, or to help them diagnose on a on a deeper level. Or do you know what I mean? They should never become reliant on the AI. It should just be there as a tool to help the clinician with whatever they're using it for, whether it's to help diagnose, or for instance with Monica, it's helping for well-being and things at home. You still need, with Monica, for instance, we have the dashboard, right, where the clinicians or the carers can see it. They can view everything that's going on, and we will flag anomalies, right, and then it goes to them, and they will make the clinical decision based upon the information we've given them. We won't be saying, they need this because of this. It would be like, here's an anomaly. Maybe they've been to the toilet 4 times in the night. It's potential risk of UTI, but obviously it's there to help the clinician. It's not replacing the clinician. And I think that's kind of the harmonious balance that is going to have to happen. The pendulum can't shift, because then it becomes scary. And from a patient point of view, if you know that your kind of health is being determined by an AI, there'd be a lot of backlash, right? A lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable. Whereas with clinicians, you get to know them, right? You get to know your GP, you get to know your dentist, you understand them, and you're in safe hands with whoever it may be, whether it be your clinician, your nurse, your doctors. Whereas with its AI, you don't have that level of personal connection. And I think that's really vital for anything in healthcare. It needs to have the personal connection at the forefront, really.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think actually circling back to the original point with what you're saying, that was really interesting, which is that you can't. I think the where a lot of health tech businesses are going wrong is sometimes it seems from a clinician's point of view like they're trying to dictate what a clinician should do. So it's almost like a criticism of the way that clinicians are operating now, rather than this is how we can help or optimize what you're doing. Instead of that, it's almost like this is what you're doing wrong and this is how it should be. But from a clinician's perspective, if you're communicating in that way, it makes it seem like, and I'm not saying that health tech companies are coming with this approach intentionally, but it's just the way it comes across. Sometimes it comes across like you're doing your job wrong.
Yeah, all of the years you've spent, 25, like for Mark, for example, had been in for 25, 30 years, going to somebody who's, been in there longer than I've been alive, being like, hey, you're doing something wrong. It's like, well, you're gonna face backlash. And I think just like I said, going back to kind of the dashboard with my care, because it's a relevant example, is we basically provide you with all of the information which will help you make an informed decision. We're not saying you should do this, saying, these are all of here's some anomalies, this is what they've been doing, here's what they haven't been doing that maybe they normally do. For example, they've had more activity here instead of here, which could indicate this, but giving you all the information to make an informed decision. And instead of somebody, a carer or something, having to go to somebody's home and checking this at the time, the beauty of obviously of Monica and at a lesser level, I'm going to say remote monitoring, because we do more than that, but is kind of having all the information at hand, so someone can make the decision. And once again, it helps alleviate a little bit of staff burnout, because you're not having to go check in on somebody 3 times a day. You may only have to go once, which obviously will help kind of with the burnout issue. But yeah, I think that's a completely agreed, and I'm sure you're kind of experiencing a little bit of that with your agency, because it's the way of wording it. I doubt a lot of people are coming in, as you mentioned, with that mindset, but the way it's brought across definitely can kind of leave a sour taste, I think, in clinicians' mouths. It just needs to be positioned a little bit better, and they need to. You just need to spend the time with the clinicians to let them know that what the technology is, how it's going to help them, not replace them, not question them, how it's going to help them just increase the patient experience. And also, if it's a bonus if it can free up a little bit of their time, so they're not having to spend half of their day doing something kind of menial or mundane. But yeah, I agree, and I think it leads quite nicely into the next question, actually, because so from a clinician's perspective, what do you think are the key kind of areas or elements of communication? So what are the key elements of the effective communication that's in a clinical setting? So how can technology enhance these areas? So obviously you can use dentistry for an example. You'll have direct there, but maybe as a general, from a clinical point of view, how do you think technology can actually come in to kind of enhance certain processes at the moment?
There's a couple of ways that come immediately to mind. I think, for example, even on this call, on this podcast that we're on now, automatically my AI note taker comes on, and what it does is at the end of this, it will just come up with a summary of what was discussed, which is really useful for me. I mean, obviously not in the podcast setting, but for example, when I'm having meetings with clients, for instance, it will summarize the entire call, and then I won't have to just take notes, right? So if we take that approach to healthcare, right, and this is for everyone involved, right, and I'm not just talking from a dental perspective, pharmacists and medics and all the rest of it. When you're having consults with patients, I think the bit that most of us struggle with is it's really hard to multitask. So to write notes while the patient is talking, there's two things that can happen there. One is you're not listening to what the patient is saying, and two, the patient can pick up on the fact that you're not listening, and then they feel like you're not being attentive. So integrating things like this, where there's a solution that I'm using, this is specific to dentistry, but there's a solution I'm using called dental audio notes, which is exactly like this, where what it does is I have a microphone attached to me, attached to my scrubs, and it's recording the entire consultation. And what it does at the end of the consultation is it will assimilate all that information into like a notes template. So the way I normally write my notes, it will write my notes using the AI recording. Now, the important thing to note there is I don't just use that verbatim, copy and paste that into the patient's records and it's done, because then we go back to the problem that we just discussed, which is, okay, well, if 5 years down the line, AI somehow hallucinated and made something up because it didn't understand what I said, then we're in trouble, because then, in 5 years' time, if someone wants to read my notes and they'll say, well, and the patient will say, well, that didn't happen, they're in a bit of trouble. So I think it's using things sensibly, and I think the other thing that it can really help with, which I've seen is very effective, is with radiographs and x-rays. There's a lot of these kind of, again, code diagnosis tools that can help to pick up things. And a lot of these tests are proving that they're more effective than clinicians at picking up certain things, because inevitably in the healthcare setting, you're seeing, especially primary care, physicians, dentists, pharmacists, you're seeing 25, 30, 35 patients a day. So that's a lot of data for you to process. So for example, with radiographs and x-rays, you might see, let's say it's 25 x-rays in the day. Inevitably by the 15th x-ray, you're going to be a bit fatigued, and there's going to be things that you might miss. And that's not negligence, that's just fatigue. That's eye fatigue is human nature, right? You're gonna fatigue. But these code diagnosis tools, what they do is they help to pick up pathology. So again, I'm going to use the dental example because that's what I'm closest to, but there's one called Pearl AI, which is really good at what it does. It's not only useful for me as a clinician, but what it also does is it highlights certain parts of the tooth. Let's say, for instance, say you've got a cavity in your tooth, I'm trying to show you an x-ray, it will highlight where the problem is. Whereas I don't know if you've encountered this when you go to the dentist, but sometimes if a dentist is showing you an x-ray, all you're seeing is just shades of grey. Like you have no idea what they're showing you. You're just kind of nodding along.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah, if you're not trained to look at these kind of things, I'm thinking, what is happening here? What's happening here?
Exactly. And what this software does is it actually colors in, like it colors in. So, say for example, there's a cavity, it will color in green where it's the safe zone, and then it will color in red where the danger zone is, and it's going close to your nerve, let's say, for instance. So those kinds of things are really good at educating patients to kind of bring things down to a simpler level. So you're not so reliant on your communication.
Yeah, I think that's important, and two really good examples, and it kind of touches on what I mentioned with some of the menial, kind of more mundane tasks, right? A lot of I know in the NHS, a lot of nurses and doctors and things spend a lot of their time writing up notes and writing up, all of these kind of things. So being able to, as you said, for example, for yourself, it would write the notes. You would then look at it, obviously amend, change, do what you need, but you've got the base skeletal structure there with the key areas, which will ultimately save you a lot of time. And also trying to remember what's that. So as you said, if you're having a consultation and you're trying to note down, there's kind of two ways to do it, right? You like actively note it, like noting down while talking, and then you said the two issues would be you may be missing things, or the patient's feeling like you're not kind of engaging with them, and they kind of feel unimportant. But the other side of that is, okay, so you don't note anything down, and you try to remember at the end of the consultation, which is just a recipe for disaster. Nobody how good you are, especially if you've, like you said, after the 15th or the 20th consultation of the day, your brain's not going to be operating as sharply as it was on 1, 2, 3, or 5. That's, like you say, it's not negligence. That's just, we're humans at the end of the day. And as you know, everybody's understaffed. I've already spoken to you about the lack of dentists in my area. It's like trying to find gold at the end of the rainbow to get a dentist where I live. But I think they're really good points, and I think as well the second one that you mentioned is really useful, especially because I can imagine that straight away how that would help me, because if you're in the healthcare sector, even me, right? I'm not clinical. I'm just I work for my care. I've been in kind of health tech for the last 3 years. If I'm talking to my partner, or if I'm talking to somebody, I'll use healthcare terminology and like colloquialisms, and my partner will like kind of look at me, think, what? And I'm like, oh, sorry. I mean, you have to kind of normalize it, because when you're around it all the time, you understand these terminologies, you understand all of this stuff, but that doesn't mean the normal person on the street does. If they're not in, majority of, a lot of people aren't in healthcare, or they don't understand certain terminologies. So being able to really simplify whatever it is, whether it, like you said, it's a two-factor rail, all of these things, and just say, right, the green area is fine, the red area is bad. Almost. It makes a massive difference. And it also, I think people are more hesitant, and I think this is for clinicians, for patients, for everybody. People are more hesitant at anything when they don't understand it. So just being able to really simplify and level the playing field and say, this area is not good, this area is fine. You say, okay, great. And then you can then say, right, so we're going to be doing this and this to fix this red area. They can visually see, okay, fine, great. And I agree. I think that is key. Whereas I think at the moment it's trying to just, the key area is trying to free up time and just increase the kind of the patient experience are kind of key areas I think the NHS needs, and just healthcare in general, because it's a complicated profession. Healthcare, everything health related, it's difficult, right? And there's a reason you have to go and study for a long time, and you have to do all of these things at university and all these placements and things to even become a clinician, because it's not something that should be taken lightly. As I said earlier on, it's a high risk kind of job, right? You're dealing with people's health, and it's not like me, for example, or somebody that's maybe working in an office. It's completely different. So I agree. I think there's definitely ways and ways we can start to slowly introduce AI, so people are becoming more comfortable and accustomed to how AI can help, and it can help the patient, right? So Monica, she's not just there to listen. She doesn't listen to you anyway, but she's not just there to monitor when you go to the toilet and things like that. She's a companion, so she can really become a staple in your house. But she's also helping the clinicians and the healthcare professionals keep a closer eye of your health, make sure that you're okay, and ultimately you can stay at home independent for longer, for example. So I think they're really good, and it's good that you mentioned two ones. I'll have a look after that for both of those that you mentioned, just to see how they actually look, because obviously I've got a picture in my head as to how the imagery would work, but it's always nice to see kind of how people are doing that. And I guarantee for the second one, for example, I guarantee there was a clinician involved in creating that technology, because
Yeah.
the clinicians know the pain points. The pain points, like you've
Mm.
mentioned, when, like, if I looked at an X-ray, it's just a whole bunch of greys and
Yeah.
darker greys and lighter greys. You know exactly what you're looking for, but that's because it's a solution created from a real problem that's probably come from somebody that's worked within the sector, that has been on the ground. That's like, oh, this is so annoying.
Yeah.
They always struggle. So they said, okay, I'm going to make a solution to fix this. And I think I think that should be the birth point for a lot of technology that is healthcare focused, is kind of for hands-on experience of, oh, this is so inconvenient, or this is really annoying, or I'm really struggling to do this. Okay, well, how do we fix that? How do we
Yeah.
make my life and all of the other dentists around the world, like around the UK and around the world's lives, easier with this technology? And I think that is the core. It's kind of like the whole topic of today, but that is the core to making a really good, practical, and kind of a solid solution that works in concept and actually works in practice. Because working in practice and working in concept are two completely different things, as you'll know. Something could sound amazing on paper, and then when it gets in practice, it could be thinking, it doesn't quite work right. And that's where if a clinician's on board and you're trialing it with clinicians, they can give feedback, right, and say, yeah, actually. So for the X-ray, they might, for example, if the good area was in, dark green and the bad area was in light green, it's a silly oversight, but you could say, yeah, the bad area needs to be in a different color to really,
Yeah.
just, that's a really basic, simple example. But I think that collaboration is absolutely kind of essential, and it leads into kind of my last question that I've got for you as well. So how do you think healthcare professionals, organizations, and these technology developers, provide people making this technology for healthcare, how do you think that they kind of make sure that the solution actually aligns with the needs and preferences of clinicians? And what does the feedback play in this alignment? So I've just touched on it a little bit, but obviously it'd be really good to hear your thoughts from a clinician, boots on the ground point of view.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised how many health tech, med tech companies there are that don't have any clinicians within their team, not even on like a medical advisor role or a consultancy role. And a lot of them are kind of engineers and software guys paired up with sales and marketing guys, and then there's no clinician involved at all. And it sounds silly because you're like, oh, it's a health tech company, like obviously they're going to have clinicians. And going back to what you said, you'd assume that sometimes it's a clinician that started the idea, so they'd have the best idea, but sometimes it's not the case. A lot of the time it can be an engineer that happened to see this problem exist, and they went off on their own way and developed this product, and it's really good. But instead of having a clinician on board to kind of help with the development process, it's kind of completely devoid of that. And then what ends up happening is you're assuming what the problems are rather than actually investigating and seeing what the problems are. So I think that's the big thing really is, and it's the thing I try and stress the most, is how we can bring clinicians into the team, like not necessarily as an official member, but it could be like on an advisory basis or a consultancy basis where you're having clinicians input directly. Because like you said, for instance, there's small oversights, the light green, dark green thing. It sounds silly, but you'd be surprised if you're not a clinician, that's a simple thing to overlook, because you wouldn't encounter that problem. You wouldn't be seeing it day to day. So how would you know? Yeah, I think that's the most important thing to do, is try and get them on board.
And I think kind of touching on that bit as well, just with the different colors, for example, also the terminology is what I said earlier on. If you're in healthcare and health tech and whatnot, you understand the terminology. But let's say somebody just from tech who doesn't really have much experience. Let's say a US, they're based in the US, right? But they're making something for the UK market. There's differences in terminology. There's differences in where, like, how we procedures and how we do things here. So you really do need somebody who is from the UK, who is involved in whatever they're trying to fix, to give the proper and accurate kind of assessment, so as you said, no one's assuming anything, that you could say, obviously with the X-ray thing, I'm going to keep going back to it because it's such an easy and great kind of thing that you mentioned was, a company in the US, for example. I don't know where this company is based that actually does it, but let's just say they're based in the US. They could maybe, the way they summarize, or for example, the note taker. I know it's your voice, and it takes the notes and whatnot, but let's say it's kind of US and different words are, like you said, it may not fully understand some of the words because you're from the UK, so it presumes and just puts different words in, and you think, well, no, that's not quite right. In the UK, this is said like this is said this way, or this is this, and it's fine tuning the little things, because all of the little things, if they all add up right, you get a great end product. But if lots of little things are missing throughout the way, it can feel clunky and it can feel not smooth. And if it becomes more hassle to use it than it's worth, then the whole kind of point of it becomes partially mute, because the whole point is to make the clinicians, to make the life easier for whatever we're making it for. And if it's not doing that, then and that also struggles with procurement and adoption, right? If you're demoing your whatever the technology is, and the clinician's struggling to understand it, or it's not really tailored particularly well to, from a clinical point of view or from the UK market, if they can already start to pick it apart in the head and already see issues, you're going to struggle to get them on board and adopt it. And so you need somebody on with you to just make sure the key areas are ticked. And I think constant feedback is useful. Once the solution's out there, that is the best time to continue to get feedback, to continue to hone this in. This does this when really I would prefer it to not do that at this time, instead do this instead. And you're like, okay, great, but you wouldn't know it until it's actually in a live environment where it's operating independently. For example, for Monica, we have a cohort, we have a group of older adults that use our solution, and they constantly give us feedback, and we constantly work with the trust that we're obviously have projects with. We're constantly working with them on a weekly basis. We have multiple meetings a week to make sure that everything's going well, and if any feedback comes, we can start to amend it with the goal of having the best user experience possible to bring the best outcomes. And I think, as you said, not a lot, but it definitely happens. I don't know the exact statistic, but there'll be definitely people making these technologies, and they'll have good intentions, but they just don't have all of the information to make a really good product. And I think that's where, like you said, the AI kind of chatbot wrapped up in a wrapper and doing this, spitting it out, that's where the dilution becomes, and that's where also good products suffer. The people that have actually done the due diligence, and they have advisors on board, they have consultants to really create a good product, that's where they will suffer, because these people aren't taking the steps to actually bring somebody on board and make sure that the solution aligns with the needs and preferences of whatever market they're kind of targeting.
No, exactly. And even to the point that you brought up about the US to the UK kind of thing, I see a lot of US companies that try and bring their idea to the UK, and the issue is they're not factoring in the elephant in the room, which is the NHS. Like, that's a whole different beast compared to other countries where it's massively privatized, and they've got different obstacles, right? In the US, for instance, you've got the insurance providers. That tends to be the big obstacle with getting things integrated within existing systems. But here in the UK, the NHS is that, and there's a lot of red tape and a lot of things that people need to get past in order to get even past the first stage of kind of beta testing things.
Yeah, it's a long process, isn't it? I think for the UK, it can be a really long process to procure technology, because, as you said, it has to go through it has to jump through a lot of different hoops, and lots of different people within the trust, for example, need to understand the technology to see its benefits. So it may be the clinician first, but then the tech team needs to understand it because it's new technology, and then this other person may need to understand it who's actually using it on the ground. So there's kind of lots of different points with the NHS in particular. As you said, the NHS is its own beast, definitely, and it can be a difficult one, and that's why we should lean on clinicians and people that understand the NHS, that have been there and that are still actively in the NHS, to kind of say, right, so what's the best way to go about this then? This is the technology. How do you think we should approach this? Or how, is there anything that we need to change for this? And then they can come back and say, yeah, actually, this is a really common problem with this kind of technology. This is how you actually navigate that to help speed up the procurement piece, for example, to get it in, or to, like you said with the agency, that this is how you communicate with clinicians about what you do. This is how you want to position it. You don't want to come in from this angle because you'll push them away a little bit. You want to actually come in from this angle, and it kind of sounds trivial, but it makes a massive difference, because at the end of the day, looping right back to the beginning, it's a high risk industry, really. Healthcare, it's people's health, it's high risk, so the due diligence has to be is matches the risk. It is super in depth and super thorough. So you've got to make sure that your technology is bulletproof, and you can't do that without getting insights from people on the ground that know the industry and know the NHS, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, we've gone through all the questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of say as your outro piece, or is there anything that you'd like to quickly discuss?
To be honest, I think we've covered a lot of bases, right, in the conversation. But
I think we've done good. I think we've strayed away and we've come back, and we've strayed away and come back. I think it's been a good in depth, and this is just one topic along a whole range of different kind of little crevices that you can go into, and you can discuss probably on different episodes, which like I said, we can talk about if we can have future episodes on different topics too. This was just, I think this is a really relevant one right now, especially as you said, as AI is starting to become really important, and starting to become adopted, and lots of technologies are being put towards the NHS packaged up with some form of AI. I think it's good for people listening to kind of understand the value of clinicians and people in the space when creating these technologies.
For sure.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Sugz. Thanks for being on the episode. I've been a pleasure to have you on here. I hope everybody that's listening has enjoyed. Obviously, as always, if you have any questions, pop a message to me, pop a message to MyCare. If you want to speak with Sugz, his LinkedIn will also be in there, so go connect with him, talk with him, have engagement with him. Obviously, he has the agency as well, so if you need a little bit of help with maybe positioning and things, go to him and have a conversation. Once again, Sugz actually is on the podcast as he reached out to me, so if you think you have a good topic or something that you'd like to talk about, pop me a message. If it fits nicely or is something we feel like we can talk about, we'll have that discussion, and maybe you could be on the next episode of the Health Tech Hub podcast. So thank you again, Sugz, for having the time to come onto the podcast. It's been really, really good, and it's been a really nice conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Health Tech Hub podcast by MyCare. Once again, thank you, Sugz, for being on the podcast. It was a really, really interesting topic, and I really enjoyed, and I thought it was interesting for anybody out there that has or works for a health tech company to think about kind of how we're going about things to make sure that our technology really gets the need of the clinicians and the need of the people that we're developing it for. So thank you so much, Sugz, again. His links will all be in the description. You can message him. As always, all of MyCare's links will be in the description. You can message MyCare. You can go onto our website, understand a little bit more about what we do for organizations with Monica, our conversational AI. I will also be in the description, so you can message me. This is what Sugz did. So if you have maybe some interesting topics or anything you kind of want to talk about and think would be a good episode, message me. We can have a conversation, and you never know, you could be the next guest. So thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next month for another episode.